Thank you. And your host today are AK,
And Ivana?
and today we have you with us, Michelle Leedy, and we're super excited that you're here.
Excited to
Um,
join you. Thank you.
that's really nice. When we had our prep call, we talked about what you do, and I noticed that you mentioned one sentence that I wanted to bring up today, and then ask if you could put some more words on that, because you told us that what you do is that, among other things, you work on lifting up teams to be the best possible version of themselves, and I really like that. So would you mind telling more about how you do that and what it is you do?
Yeah. Definitely one of my passions is it's lifting up, I would say, individuals, teams, and organizations to be the best version of themselves. And I think depending on the role and the assignment at hand, where I focus my energy can vary. There, it's supporting individuals through coaching, through advisory, sometimes through mentoring, or even consulting, depending on the role. Teams definitely as a facilitator, often of sorts, and sometimes as a direct leader in organizations. Currently, I work more in advising leaders. But I've also worked actively as a leader in organizations in multiple roles. And when I think about organizations and my role in supporting organizations and being the best version of themselves, that's through applying aspects of organization effectiveness as a leader in the profession that I'm in. That can take shape through, or different aspects of organization design, through change leadership, and really, I think, through being a strategic business partner to the leaders that I work with.
Thank you. That is a perfect profile. We could really use some coaching and advisory for Marie and her leadership colleagues. So that's just amazing. Michelle, would you mind, just in your own words, briefly telling us a bit about what you read in the extract for today?
What I read about today.
Hmm.
Yeah, and so, yeah, a very interesting chapter for sure. And for me, when I think about summarizing today's chapter and my kind of thought or response around it is it is a pivotal period for Marie in terms of really pausing, I think, and deciding what is the appropriate path to take. She's really at a turning point right now. I sense that Marie, wants to be responsive. What I'm observing or feeling is that she's being reactive and jumping into solutions quite quickly, even as the organization she's aware might be shifting in strategy, and doesn't necessarily even have awareness around what that is. She's on the outside, she's speculating, yet still moving forward in action. So to me, my takeaway was, wow, real turning point and chance for Marie to really be intentional with selecting the path forward. I felt a little concerned for Marie by the time I got to the end of the chapter.
Well, that's a great summary. I think it's very well observed that this is really where we see her struggle to figure out, well, which way to go from here. It is that chapter where things are shifting underneath her, and yet she's still trying to act. I would be curious on your perspective of a couple of people in this chapter ask Marie to be in the work. Uh, from your perspective, do you feel like she's in the work, or as you mentioned, is she an outsider kind of observing what is happening?
My initial observation, she is outside looking in at the most strategic level in the organization. When I think about that executive suite where some of the core conversation is happening, she is outside looking in, metaphorically and literally. She was looking through a doorway and given a nod to please go away by someone in the room. Her own direct leader, vice president of HR, kind of gave her the sample kind of pat on the shoulder as Mark moved on into the meeting without information. And even the CEO just, gave her just a pinch of information. Yet she's outside looking in. And despite that, she is getting into the work a layer deeper, while I would say being misinformed or not at least clearly informed, validating her information before proceeding. I think she thinks she's in the work, but I think she's more outside.
Mm, that's a great observation. One of the things I would also be curious about hearing your perspective on is she is still trying to fix the organization that exists right now. Like the problems that Zebra Apps has been carrying for a while, this is what she's trying to engage with and try to rectify. Is that where she should be putting her time, given that the organization may be shifting?
I think there are instances where we may be in crisis mode and have immediate things that need addressed. For instance, retention of key talent as
Mm.
things are shifting. Um, that said, she needs to be focused on what the organization needs moving forward. From my perspective, she needs to be clear on what the future strategy is. It's an opportunity for her to provide more strategic level expertise on saying, does that mean from an org design standpoint, is our operating models and business models still appropriate? And really identifying what HR's talent implications are then for supporting the future state. Um, Again, I do think there are instances where there are immediate short-term low-hanging fruit needs, kind of the metaphorical stop the bleeding sort of needs, and she may have a few of those, yet it appears from my perspective she's being short-sighted and getting caught in the current state of the organization, and perhaps getting caught in the feedback of leaders that are not the leaders she needs to be listening to from a decision-making standpoint.
How would you know which leaders to listen to?
So ideally, and this does not appear to be the case for Marie at the current time, ideally she's aware who the key influencers and decision makers are in the organization. So to get into tools or models, very simple stakeholder analysis could be a simple tool she applies. When we don't have time to go deep, I'm a huge fan of using RACES, which is, who's responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. And right now, there are some decisions that need made for solutioning, and it does not appear that she is clear who has strategic accountability at the executive level to be partnering with those leaders in the right way and ensuring buy-in. So I think those are a couple short-term things that she could do to have better understanding if she doesn't currently have it. Ideal State is also working through the vice president of HR, Mark, who does have a seat at the executive table, but has not brought her into those conversations. So I think those are three, immediate means to do that, that they may not be available to her right now.
And I think that's a really, really good point, because now that you say this, it's actually true that she was tasked to fix this culture program, but we haven't heard any time in the story that she's actually been directly asking neither Mark nor Natalie, the CEO and her manager, the VP of HR, for the actual future strategy of Zebra Apps. She's been looking more retrospectively on what has been happening up until now that has caused this, loss of people or people resigning. But she hasn't actually focused that much on the future, except for this section where she now suddenly gets really curious about what's going on in the secret meeting with the leadership team, as you say. So it's a good point that she should have been more proactive in actually seeking this information. And of course, I think you also allude to the fact that her manager probably should have brought her in and helped her with this. But you're right that she's actually really focused on the past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, there's some things that she's been asked to do, including from the vice president of engineering, yet it's not clear, the overall executive suite level, what is the standing of that individual? Is this really where she should be taking information to the point that she's even thinking of walking away from her designated role, putting someone into an interim role of which it doesn't appear from a successor standpoint there is agreement or buy-in around that person's competency to move into a role, at least from the CEO standpoint. And so she seems to be operating somewhat in a silo from those who will ultimately be able to support her success, particularly if the sands are shifting in the organization. So I think she's put herself, well intended, into what sometimes people call a CLM, a career limiting move. And so she may find herself, particularly if the sands are shifting and she jumps too quickly to solution and steps outside of really her strategic accountability and or responsibilities, in a really tough spot personally, professionally, as well as, her ability to really support the change that's being asked for in a sustainable way.
Yeah, I would be curious to dive more into this piece because we have an example here of Marie's employee, Erik, actually suggesting that she takes this fuzzy, ill-defined role in engineering while he steps into her current role as head of development HR. Uh, what would you have done if you were in Marie's shoes here?
Well, probably more, I would be seeking to understand the needs of Erik as a colleague and leader within the team. I would not be looking for direction from Erik in terms of the structure of the role and move. I think that's not where certainly take that feedback into account in decision making, elevate and surface it as it's relevant for broader decision making. Yet these decisions are really those that go beyond Marie's, from my
Mm.
perspective. So I think she's, would I have been like, sure, that's a great idea. Let me, vacate this role. You move into it. Before we understand strategy or this potential M&A that's going on, or divestiture or whatever it is, I'm going to move into this role into the unknown, and we're still not even clear about the positioning of the VP of engineering and all this. That might not even be the right leader in the right place at the right time
Mm.
based on the organization currently or for future state. So I think she's reacting and making decisions prematurely.
Yeah, I would also be curious to hear your perspective on the power in this organization, because uh, it seems to differ from the actual organizational chart. We have Natalie's the CEO senior leadership team, but they do not hold equal power. Some people she seems to trust more than others. Some people carry less clout than they could have. We're talking about the VP of engineering who may or may not be in the right place. How can you understand the actual power and not just the one that's on the org chart?
Yeah, so I think any access we have to history in terms of how decisions has been made, I call that navigating the political terrain. Sometimes some of our largest influencers aren't those at a senior level seat, yet certainly have their finger on the pulse of what's going on in the organization and can influence it greatly. So I think kind of that qualitative data that's occurs just through understanding how things have happened in the past is relevant, where relationships reside. It was referenced some people worked together before they were at the current organization, particularly when people follow one another in these kinds of professional tribes. That's really good information to know, because they have history, which may be great history. It may not be great history, but when they land back together, that is really fruitful to understand. Um, Ideally, she has some informal trusted advisors within the organization. Ideally, that would be Mark at a minimum, but if not, someone else, particularly in an HR leadership role where she can tap into. But from what I read in this chapter, that internal trusted advisory was unclear, and she's actually taking the feedback from one of her direct reports who's suggesting she move out of role while he step in, and seems to maybe pump her ego a little bit to say, wow, you're really a powerful person here, you need to do this. Yet the story does not support her positioning as a really powerful person from my perspective at the table, because she's not being invited to it.
Is that what power entails, being at the table where decisions are made? Or are there other dynamics of what power could look like?
I think there's a lot of dynamics for what power can look like based on what she's been tasked to do. I do think she needs to have the support of her senior leadership. She needs to have understanding of strategy and how it's changing so that she can solution appropriately. So whether we call that power or not, I think there's information has power and she's missing some key information. She certainly can exercise her power muscles in other ways in the organization, through people's lived experience, through the employee experience currently, through shaping what that looks like during the current state or upcoming times of change. Those are absolutely other power muscles that I think she could tap into based on what she does have available to her while making an impact.
Thank you. So just to to be clear here, so if you were in Natalie, the CEO's leadership team, or if you were Natalie, and you had tasked your VP of development HR to look into why people are resigning and to come up with a solution, what are the structures or the how would you kind of set that up for her or support her in a good way?
Yeah. Knowing at this point in the story that there's some type of sell that's being seriously considered. We don't know, is it a merger? Is it an acquisition? Is it a divestiture? Is it some type of strategic business partnership? We don't know. Given this potential change, the company has risk. We know that the CEO is very risk averse to anything that could impact the revenue and success. Maybe feeling somewhat desperate given some of the changes in key talent and how the organization is performing. At its core, I think this is an organization design conversation. And by org design, for me, that doesn't mean do we have the right people in the right seats in terms of structure completely. I think it's truly grounding in the strategy of the organization, confirming where that's at, supporting the leadership through saying, do we have a change in operating model? And what are the HR talent implications of that? And then backing out into, okay, now based on this, where do we see shift? Where do we need to build capability in the organization, including leadership capability? Generally, from my perspective, building leadership capability doesn't mean, oh, you're not doing a great job, let me step into that role for you. To lead, as an example, an engineering team as an HR talent development leader, it's really saying what's the capability we need in the organization for leaders, what's our vision for the leaders, and supporting strategy, whatever it means to win in the marketplace, or if it's an organization that means serving in the marketplace or serving in the community, and then building out from there. That then includes what's the right culture for us. Do we agree to what that is? Uh, um, do we agree to how we want to take action to embed the employee experience and the culture that we desire in the organization? And what's the ripple effect of that as it relates to leader, not only their technical and functional skills, but their behaviors and attributes and overall collective capability to move the organization forward and deliver on that employee experience. It is not, from my perspective, an isolated role of which HR is strategically accountable to take action on all of that. I do see HR as potentially strategically accountable to shape what that looks like and work with the
Mm.
organizations and its leader who also have around responsibility as people leaders, to improve the employee experience and the culture.
In this story for today, we also learned that there is a group of people trying to shape this organization that may not be in leadership positions. We see this with Jason when he starts. He references that there is this group of people that are trying to invoke change in the organization, and Marie also encounters similar mentions later in the story. Uh, how do you think about the fact that there's the formal leadership that are trying to shape the strategy and the development of the organization, and then there are some interested parties that are also trying to influence how the organization develops that may be different from the formal leadership?
Yeah. So a beautiful opportunity to tap into the passion and influence of people at every level of the organization who have a desire to influence change. The disjointed aspect between moving forward on what that change is related to strategically where the organization is going is problematic. And so
Mm,
I think this is an opportunity, again, for Marie to pause, clarify, and understand based on the readiness of the organization. They may have I was going to say NDAs, non-disclosure agreements underway at this point. It is
mm,
not at a point of readiness, perhaps, for her to move forward, to understand what is that pause? Is there incremental work that can be done to support change leadership and then change management based on where the organization is today? And then tap into those fabulous change leaders and advocates at every level of the organization to move the change forward once it's clear what it is. Right now, there's not clarity, at least from my perspective, at least not validated clarity. And if there was a few chapters ago, those sands are shifting. And so it's time to pause, recalibrate before acting too quickly, because those good intentions, I think, could do more damage than good if it's not well informed. And if there's not executive sponsorship and agreement based on where the organization is headed.
mm. That makes sense. Especially when the formal leadership might not know that there are these people also trying to influence change. It can be hard to move in consort towards the same direction.
Yeah, yeah. And, I think when there is that agreement, a lot of that messaging and where Marie can provide some perhaps internal advisory and support is in shaping some of that messaging so
Mm,
that based on the readiness, again, of the team to be able to share information, it is coming from the leadership and being threaded through the organization in a very intentional way, as opposed to, I'll call it scuttlebutt. I don't know if you ever used that term, the scuttlebutt, the hallway chatter,
mm,
which interestingly, Marie seems to be coming engaged in,
mm,
which is not ideal leader behavior. She's engaging in that even with her team, as opposed to really understanding what's there as a leader and sharing it. It's
mm.
almost a little gossipy, which is less than ideal, and again, I think could damage her credibility to engage not only her team but others if she doesn't recalibrate this and really think about, again, how to, I think, be responsive instead of reactive.
Mm. I also want to dive into the fact that Richard returns into the picture. Richard, who founded Zebra Apps together with Natalie, and then left Zebra Apps, and now is in this conference room where something is being discussed about the future of Zebra Apps. Uh, any thoughts on Richard's return?
Yeah, so definitely pretty intentional from Natalie's standpoint, from my perspective, considering that they were co-founders. Richard left. wouldn't be brought back unless, what wasn't referenced is where's the board of directors in this, if there is a board of directors or whoever those advisors are from a governance standpoint. It's possible Natalie's in the mix and bringing Richard back. It's possible that she or he's not. It's definitely relevant. It's an investment. Boomerangs are great, but especially for someone at that level to come back, this hints toward either that revised strategy, perhaps, or what's happening in this kind of buying situation. So it's time to pause and assess for sure.
Going back to this scuttlebutt, was that what the term you used?
Scuttlebutt, yes.
I love that term. We do see in this section of the book that Marie does take this role in engineering, and she engages with the engineers and tries to understand where they are at. And sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Let me just refine my train.
But I can ask then in terms of the hallway chatter, your point about that. So Marie is, I think these people in the engineering department, they are obviously making conversation with her, being friendly. How would you advise Marie to kind of approach these people? Because she wants to build trust with them, but is there a better way than instead of the way she chooses?
I think so. Moving formally into a leadership role in the organization does not create accountability or build capability with other leaders. I think she's looking to kind of air quotes fix it and let me kind of like own it directly, as opposed to advise, consult, inform, build capability within the organization. This is not a sustainable method of improvement. Any leader could struggle with some of the leadership aspects of their department. That doesn't mean that an HR professional goes, okay, let me take over that now, as opposed to how do we support? I mean, that could be an endless cycle of just
Yeah.
HR leadership rotation. And I would question, she kind of self-identified for this role with the input of one of her direct reports who wants her job to move into it. Is she the right person? That's not clear. Why her if there's going to be another interim leader? So yes, I do think there's a better way. One is through, I think, qualitative data that can be collected through analysis and based on the safety and readiness of people to share that. I think part of that needs assessed. In organizations that are experiencing challenges like this, sometimes people don't feel safe in sharing their thoughts. So there needs to be a way to methodically collect I think both qualitative and qualitative data to inform that. And that might mean that it's happening through a third party because the reality is she is internal. She's in HR, and as much as she would love for people to trust her and talk with her, she's going to be showing up still as a representative of the organization and a neutral party to gather that data, whether it's through focus group, whether it's through diagnostics and other things may be needed, at least to validate what's shared. I think that there are other things that can be put in place as well to understand how this organization has been positioned. Are the engineers and their leaders clear on what their operating model is? Are the goals clear? Are they clear on strategic accountabilities, responsibilities in terms of how they work? Some of the reward systems need addressed. We know that disparity, lack of equity has surfaced. I mean, there are so many tentacles or roots to this tree that need addressed, which is why I go back to org design, a high level, I think, organization assessment that would position her as a more strategic business partner to solution before diving so deep and saying, let me just jump into that role and figure out what's going on. She seems, again, I think probably well intended, but not taking the best path forward.
And I think you're right. It seems like she's just showing up, and at least we don't get to hear if she's been, how this role has been described to the people in the engineering department. We don't really know what the role is, other than that it's to fix the culture or like fix the ASLO problems. So I think you're right that she is kind of jumping to conclusions and taking this role without really having done the necessary pre-work or even, as you say, the organizational design. That's a good point. Ivana, did you remember your question in the meantime?
No, but I do have a new question.
Oh, good, perfect.
I'm curious, this organizational assessment and design, how would you go about doing that?
First, I would sit down with the vice president of HR to share this, popping into the CEO's office saying, I'd like to do an org assessment before the VP of HR is in the know and aware and supportive, I think is key. I think the first conversation happens there to say, here's what I'm observing, here's what I'm seeing, here's what I'm recommending. And to position that in a way in which Mark's going to be receptive to moving that forward, using some of that social capital that Marie may have and that current relationship and understanding what kind of makes Mark's clock tick, where is he enthusiastic? Where does he have reservation to make sure that that support's there? Chances are, if he's not supportive, that will fall flat, and she needs that advocacy. The next step would be most likely talking with him about what she would like to do and seeing how he sees his role in that. I think he's ultimately the one who is at the table, is at least as far as we know, the advisor to the CEO and the rest of the executive suite. So, he needs to be able to open up and share a bit more about what's going on. I would then say it's developing an executive level summary around here's what we're seeing. Back starting with strategy, backing out of where there's risks and saying the next steps. Specifically, here's what needs to happen, here's how this would occur, and here's the ask, because there's going to be an ask there of which we need the head, more than head nods at the executive suite. There's going to be some visible input and perhaps visible communication that needs to happen at that level for the organization to trust what's happening and why the data is being collected, how it's being collected, how it will be used, how people will hear the results, etc. I would suggest that occur in a rather condensed period of time. So it might be kind of a micro level assessment given the quick changing stands based on, and also based on the organization's palatability for it, where it's at. There may very well be some other diagnostics already in the work given this possible M&A, through due diligence. There could be already a third party doing some cultural work. She needs to understand that so it can either be tapped into and further leveraged or added to in a complementary way.
That makes
Thank
sense.
you. Yeah. Yeah, I also had a follow-up question a bit, I think, related to that, because now a few times you've mentioned the operating model of CBRAPS. And I was just wondering if you would share in your mind what are the most important parts of an operating model?
Oh yeah, for sure. So I think from an operating model standpoint, there's quite a few different versions out there in terms of what people might use. I would suggest for anyone interested in learning more about operating models, just even Google operating model canvases. There, operating model components, and there's going to be just some key aspects that pop up. But it really is going to ground in terms of, for each of those business lines or business functions at the highest level or even the next sub function level, it's going to really help them ground in terms of, what their purpose is, what's the business value that they're delivering, what are the capabilities and competencies they need to have, how are they going to measure success, who are their key partners, and when that is formed, it helps at that next level, I think, for clarity to say what is the structure that we need to build out. A lot of times some of those conversations really help with shaping what truly are those executive level job profiles and what do they need to look like, because of the ripple effect that that then has in building out the rest of the organization. It's a fantastic conversation for HR to be at. It's interestingly, um, in some organizations HR is, and in other organizations HR is still, but it's not the internal team, it's consultants coming in because that capability may not be there. And so it's, regardless of how that is implemented, I think it's a fabulous opportunity for HR to initiate, and if they don't have the internal capability to actually implement on it, to still be a facilitator of that conversation and recognizing that it needs to occur, so that once that is identified, HR can then take it to the next level to say, okay, now based on this, what does this mean to our talent, to our human capital, that precious gift that we have in terms of people to really move the business forward. That's why we invest in the roles. That's why we invest in the positions, so that we can move that mission forward for whatever reason it is that we exist. Whether that is a product, whether it's a service, whether that be for profit, tax exempt, nonprofit, whatever it may be, in terms of why an organization is there.
I want to investigate the ASLO problem that Marie is trying to solve. We have a problem with declining product quality. And the way that Marie is going about solving it is by looking at the organization that produces said products and trying to change that to improve the product quality. In your experience, Michelle, what is the link between product quality and the organization?
What is the link between product quality and the organization? That's an interesting question as you pose it. I think that um, the relationship is that product quality is somewhat of a measurement. It's not a output. The product is the output. The quality of that is a measurement in terms of saying, have we produced what we said we're going to produce? That may or may not relate to culture, of which Marie has jumped into. There are, multiple things that, might be considered here in terms of what are our product quality expectations, what are our processes, who is responsible for it, who's strategically accountable for it. Do we have the tools and resources in order to produce products of the quality? Is it a manufacturing issue? Do we have issue? Is it a people aspect? I mean, my guess is it's a potpourri of things, but she is jumping into it with a somewhat siloed view, and not necessarily in business partnership with others who have key accountabilities or responsibilities for product quality. She could do everything picture perfect, textbook perfect from a culture standpoint. And if there are other tentacles that are impacting product quality that are not assessed and addressed, and those which may be outside of her purview, she might elevate them for awareness to get others involved. It's still not going to improve the quality. So I don't think she's taken a holistic perspective in terms of how she's partnering with others. And again, what really is her real responsibility and role.
Mm.
Did I answer your question on that?
Yes, yes, you did. You gave me your perspective on this, and I think you're right. There, it's multifaceted, and the relationship may not be clear. So the way that Marie is going about fixing the quality problem may or may not work, depending on what the causality in the situation actually is.
Yeah, I kind of have this visual in my head of Marie kind of walking along, and there's this orbit going around and spinning, like these planets spinning around her, and she's not aware of what's in her orbit.
Mm,
She has this kind of immediate little first part of her orbit or ecosystem that she's engaging, and there's this much broader universe around her and her organization that she is just not in touch with.
mm,
She hasn't even necessarily even kind of labeled that these are some of the other key aspects that I need, when I say I, that Marie needs to be aware of. um, I'm not sure that she's thinking about those things, and moving too quickly.
mm, yeah.
Do you have some maneuvers for how to realize the orbit you're that's like floating around you?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm going to go back to on a high level, I think analysis doesn't have to be so heavy that it dies under its own weight. When
Mm,
I say org
Mm.
assessment or analysis, I think there are things that can be done that are micro level that influence how we approach things. I mentioned uh, some models in terms of just understanding kind of who's on first with different things like a racy, but I think
Mhm.
she could do a simple SWOT analysis with her team, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, or with some key leaders, and break those down, each of those into like little segments or categories within each. So, as an example, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats within each of them, getting very holistic feedback around what are leadership, products, safety, culture. You just kind of go through it, and so that we're going into it in a well-rounded way as we gather feedback. Technological, that could be one, because sometimes, and I think this is where Marie has her risk, she's kind of doing that, but she's doing it so much constrained to her bubble that she's missing the broader business
Mm.
um, aspect and
Yeah.
and what could be moving around. I think a pestle analysis, PESTLE, could be interesting. That's more of an outside in perspective, really relevant given the sands that are shifting here. What's happening here politically, economically, socially, legally, technologically, environmentally. Um, sometimes I think, particularly within HR, we can get kind of just inside again the organization, and we're not thinking about what's happening from an outside in perspective, again, impacting the business, and then backing out of that to say, again, what are the talent implications here? And what's our role in influencing that in the organization as it
Yeah.
moves forward?
mm.
That makes sense. Yeah.
I have caught up with my train of thought now.
Oh,
Let's
good.
uh, in the last section of the story, Marie is with the development team that she embeds herself with. And in this team, we have this character, Shane. He features throughout the story in several different occasions. And he often claims that he is very competent within multiple areas. And here we finally find Marie sitting down and listening to, well, what is it that he's actually competent at. I would be curious to learn on your perspective about why is it that no one knows what Shane is actually capable of, and how would you go about understanding an individual's uh, competencies if he feels unseen?
Yeah. So I think there's a mix of things here in terms of how does one perceive one's own competencies and how
Mhm.
is one perceived for their competencies in the organization. Those may align, those may not. And there's different reasons for that. And part of that could be visibility, chance to share some of these other things that one might be good at or passionate about and want to grow in. So a few different things to assess that. One is, um, are the competencies for the role already clear?
Mm.
Is there an existing competency model? As that relates to overall behaviors in a global way. In there, I'm saying, regardless of what seat you're in at any organization level, what do we expect in terms of how we show up? What's most important that's going to differentiate our organization from others in those things that are most important to us? I think there's an aspect of leadership competencies. Have those been clarified? And I say leader competencies. I think that some organizations use those specifically when they're referring to managers specifically. But to your comment earlier and your question, at least as I read into it, and I agree, philosophically, I've met managers who are not leaders. I've met leaders who are not managers. So really, when it comes to leading self, leading others, leading organizations, what do those leadership competencies look like? And then functional or technical competencies, those things that are more specific to our job as it's designed, what we were hired to do in a technical way. So one, have those even been clarified? Do we know what they are? Are they in practice? If so, how? And have people been assessed or evaluated on those in a regular way, formally through coaching feedback, through other types of things like 360s? There's different ways to do that, both from a performance standpoint and a development standpoint. I think in terms of creating awareness, I think that, there are opportunities now more and more, particularly with our technological platforms, for people to create awareness around other things that they are good at or want to be good at. And a lot of times, one thing I do observe is that people move into roles in organizations, they get to know a person in that role, and sometimes all that other history that people bring with them kind of floats into the background. Even though they have maybe, two other superpowers that they could be
Mm.
leveraging, that one superpower they were hired for is what people experience them as. And they kind of forget that there's other things there. So, there are talent profiles that can be built in, a lot of our technology systems where people can create awareness. There's development plans. There are, more and more systems that people are implementing where kind of internal talent marketplaces, particularly for large organizations, people can create visibility and awareness around what they can do. So I think these are all options, but it really depends on where the organization is at. And of course, there's more as well, but certainly just even grounding in some of the basics, I would be curious whether or not this organization has ever even done that type of work just based on what's happening. If they've not even communicated their mission and values that Natalie, the CEO, created when she co-founded it, and HR leadership isn't even aware of them, let alone the rest of the organization, I would be a little surprised if they have an actively used competency model that has really been designed based on the organization's needs.
Mm.
If it has, it's probably sitting on a shelf collecting dust based on what's happening.
That is likely in some humongous binder with other things that have been forgotten.
Yes. I wanted to just you also asked like why no one knows what Shane is good at, and I think just one guess there is that he's I think there's maybe two, there's probably many reasons, but two reasons I could think of was one. First thing is that he's been having some behavioral attitudes, or like he's not been, I don't think he's been behaving in the best way towards his colleagues. We have examples previously in the story of him being, or at least having a bragging attitude about his salary. And maybe he didn't mean to brag, but that's definitely how it was perceived. So I think that the team has not really been letting him show what he can do. And then I think that his behavior has gotten in the way of showing his actual competencies. So I just wanted to mention that. What did you have any thoughts on that, Ivana?
Yeah, I think it can be very hard to see how competent a person can be if it is hard to work with that person. If it is hard to interact, then no matter how competent you are, people are likely to find ways to work around you. So there is something about being a person that other people actually like collaborating with that usually helps.
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
I think that could be the case with with Shane here at Zebraps, because I actually do think he sounds like his profile is a good match. It's just not working in reality.
It sounds like he has those functional technical skills that you were talking about, but when
Yeah.
it comes to some of those differentiating behavioral competencies, at least however he's exhibiting those, how he's being received is not um, helping him to advance himself. I often think about now if he was so willing to do a deeper dive to understand how he's being received. I think he could be a great candidate for a 360 assessment. So, for those who may be new to 360 assessments, one, they're typically grounded in some competencies. That are selected. And if an organization doesn't have a competency model, there's a lot of providers out there who will teach some basic competencies just to get some well rounded feedback. And what one does is they complete it for themselves and say, how do I think I'm doing across these defined competencies? And I evaluate myself. But my upstream leader, the person who I report to, completes it. Um, I have some peers and I select who they are who complete it. If I have direct reports, if I am in a manager role and I have direct reports, I can ask them to complete it. And then there might even be another body of individuals that are partners that complete it. Maybe they're customers, maybe they're people, if I'm in HR as an example, they're internal people that I serve. And so I get that feedback returned back to me in a report. Someone who's trained on how to deliver and coach me
Mm.
through it delivers it. And I hear how I am perceived. And so, and what's can be really, really powerful about that is it's not about so much whether I agree with it. If something surprises me, I could have every reason under the sun why I did this because of X reason or Y reason. Power in this is how do I understand how people perceive me so I can be more intentional in my relationships and be more effective.
Mm.
um it's not about do I agree or not, is it right or wrong, and while I might be surprised, how do I be more effective through understanding how people receive me? And the beautiful thing about them is, generally there's some pleasant surprises as well. We hear things that people appreciate about us that we might not even realize. So it's a nice, well-rounded view. And I think someone like Shane, as I'm understanding him, could be a great candidate for something like this, provided he wants to do it and he's open to it.
Mm. That would be an interesting thing to watch and see if he would develop or if he would climb up and not take the feedback in.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I have one more question regarding Marie. Uh, we've discussed that she's stepping out of her HR role, a role where she has the ability to influence the strategy and structure of the organization, and then she steps into this more tactical team development leadership role. Um, in your experience, are development HR professionals exceptionally well suited for leadership? Is this a breeding ground for the future leaders, or are those two completely different competencies?
Oh, so I look at that more at the individual level. I don't know that I would say, is someone in this, people who are in this role, do they tend to be well suited for X, Y, or Z? I think it's really across the board. It's really about understanding the individual, kind of what we talked about earlier. People come into roles with all kinds of often experience in their background. And what is that experience? What is that individual's competencies, what are their career interests, where do they want to be and go. I think it's more about that individual. I think, just like in any role, there will be people well suited to move across the organization or up and across the organization. There are others who may be well suited to really develop the greatest degree of mastery in current role, and that's where they need to stay. They're strong performers there, and maybe not as transferable to other areas. So I see that as a more unique conversation.
Mm, that makes sense. Well, Michelle, as we start rounding off, unless you have other questions, AK, that you want to ask?
I had one
Okay,
question before we
go ahead.
take the last question, and this is just a quick one, Michelle, and it's also a bit probably subjective, but just to just so we all like on the same page. What do you think? Do you think Marie's employee Erik? Do you think he wants to be the VP of HR, or do you think he actually has Marie's or Zebrap's best interests in mind when he suggests this career move that we know now is a CLM, or what was it, career limiting move? Do you think that he's doing this in good faith?
I don't know Erik well enough to answer that question. I do think it's fair to say he wants to be the VP of HR. He's made that known.
Mm.
He kind of said, well, I've nicely kind of resigned myself to serving you, but yes, if things were different, I would like your job. And so,
I'm also like, no, I'll take it.
yeah. And wow, you're really powerful. Maybe you should go take this other job. And I've got our team. I'm good. And so, I think, it's fair to say he does have an interest, but I don't know that he does not have a true interest in what's best for the organization as well. I hope he does. My guess is he does. And I'm sometimes an eternal and almost annoying optimist in that I like to think that most all of us, 99 point, number percent of us show up wanting to do the best job we can, whatever that looks
Mm.
like. And sometimes the road gets muddied for us based on um, our own competencies, our own distractions, our own biases. But the reality is, I think most people show up really wanting to do their best work. And so I want to make the assumption that Erik is showing up wanting to do Erik's best work. And
Mm.
hey, if he gets to be the VP of HR while he's at it, well, I think he's going to be pretty happy about that.
Yeah, well, it could be a maneuver from his side to be like, it could be a good opportunity for him if he gets Marie's job. Then it's one step closer to his dream job, apparently. But yeah, I
Yeah.
also want to believe that he has her best interest. I previously we did um a while ago now, we did a summary chapter, and I was asked who I would like to be in this story, and I said I wanted to be Erik. So I think I have to believe that he's a good guy now that
Yeah.
I said that I wanted to be him.
You know,
This was before I knew
another,
I was going to do this.
oh, I'm
Yeah,
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
no, no, go ahead.
I do think that another spot where Marie is moving too quickly is I don't know that she appears to be looking to make a quick move with this decision and saying how are we going to tell Mark and Natalie that we're making this change, and it's not so much of a conversation because I don't know that she has set him up to be successful in that role or presented it because Natalie's first thing was, I don't think Erik's the person here. I don't think he's strong enough.
Yeah.
Really tough position to be in. It's not been well socialized. What Erik's strengths aren't well known, and so ideally, if indeed he's going to be a short-term successor, an interim leader, or long-term,
Mhm.
there's more that could be done there to position him for that.
That's a really good point. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, now let's segue into the last question that we always ask our guests. And that is, what do you think happens from here, Michelle? Or what do you hope happens from here?
What I hope happens from here is that Marie sleeps on it. She goes back before she has some emotions going on. She's feeling left out of the loop, that she stops peering through doorways in the executive room to see what's going on, chit chat and hallway chat, about what's happening, and really hits the pause button before she takes action and thinks through in a more holistic way. What is it that the business needs? Where is the business going? And how does she support that in a really thoughtful and sustainable way?
Mm.
That's my wish list for Marie.
Thank
That's
you.
a great wish, and I do hope that she grows as a person into just thinking things through before reacting.
Yeah. I think we've learned a lot today, and I think we got a lot
Mm.
of really good ideas, also very good ideas for frameworks to look into.
Yeah, and very specific advice for Marie.
Yeah, it's been really great, Michelle.
Thank
And,
you for having me. I've really enjoyed the conversation today.
and Michelle, if our listeners want to get in touch and hear more of your advice, where can they find you?
Find me on LinkedIn.
We'll make sure to include that in the show notes so you're easy to find.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle. This was a great pleasure.
Thank you again for having me.